expect that this is what they got in return. And I would like someone to take a call and
I call
assure me that I'm
Eugenie
wrong.
Sage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This section is entitled Miscellaneous. Part 4, Mr. Chair. Miscellaneous transitional provisions and consequential amendments. Now, some of these consequential amendments, like the big slab in the Minister's SOP 100 in relation to the Biosecurity Act, are not a problem. But the section, as Moana Maki has outlined, around planned petroleum activities and some of the provisions as they relate to mineral prospecting and exploration under the Continental Shelf Act are deeply troubling. And that's because, Mr. Chair, these have come in now. There hasn't been an opportunity for the Select Committee to look at them. There hasn't even been the Minister providing a commentary on them and introducing them. The SOP has, I think, a few lines about them, but that's all. So and because of the detail here and the complexity, the full scale of the impacts is not clear. But from reading the SOP and the bill to date, this whole notion in 151AA in the SOP about mineral prospecting and exploration may commence and continue if the company had a licence granted under the Continental Shelf Act 1964. And Mr. Chair, this is a licence that was granted, but the holder of the licence may not necessarily even have commenced the activity. It's not just if they'd actually commenced and had some sort of existing use rights. So it's allowing a whole class of activity to happen without the requirements for a marine consent, because this clause overrides Section 15, which of course is where all the provisions around getting a marine consent are set out, and allows an activity which isn't even underway at the moment to go ahead. So that seems incredibly permissive, particularly around exploration, for example, for phosphate or activities like that. So that's one clause that we've got quite major problems with. And then there's the clause 151A about planned petroleum activities. And, Mr. Chair, it's very interesting that the SOP in clause 151A changes the bill to make sure that the activity that's planned, and of course there is no definition of planned in clause 4, the interpretation section, so it's got very wide scope. What does planned mean? Is it just an idea in the sort of strategy section of a big oil exploration corporation? So that's not defined, so it's got very wide scope. And then in the SOP, there's quite a significant change. In the bill as introduced, the activity could continue without a marine consent until the 1st of May 2013. Now, the SOP has extended that for another year. And it's interesting that Anadarko isn't coming here this summer because it's had difficulties getting a rig. Is this the Anadarko amendment that would allow it to go prospecting without getting a marine consent under the EZ bill when it passes? Is this to allow it just to go through and put in an impact assessment on a voluntary basis but not go through the statutory provisions? So, Mr. Chair, it would be helpful if the Minister in exile took a call on this to give us some assurance that this hasn't been the quid pro quo amendment for the industry, but it is very troubling that that has been extended by a year and that we've got activities that were given licences under 1964 legislation which predate the whole consideration of environmental impact assessment that we've had through the RMA and through this bill, and that are allowed to continue even if they haven't started yet. So, Mr. Chair, that is deeply troubling about this miscellaneous part of the bill.
I call Nikki Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to speak on this part 4 of the bill, and yes,